What's going on? This is a pre-Cairo student connection. I'm super excited about this conversation. We don't have enough of these. This is a glimpse into what connecting with a pre-Cairo student could look like and sound like, and just here to give you some support, Jamie. Jamie Trujeque, thank you so much for hopping on here. Can we just get started by you just introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about what your background is, and what attracts you to this profession?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me first and foremost. Um, I guess I start off in personal training. Um, Started way back when I first was playing basketball, and I came back home and I kind of needed to figure out what to do about 8 years ago. Um, I had a mentor named Eric Red, who's pretty, popular, and he just knew a lot of things about the body. Everything he was teaching me about, neurologically, like brain-based approach to training, it kind of opened my mind to a new dimension, I guess, than your basic biomechanics training. Um, and so I ended up working with kids. I worked in the public education. I worked with LUSD for about the next 6 years. Um, I worked for a citywide department for 200 schools and worked as a behavior interventionalist. And there was just a lot of questions that needed to be asked. I wanted to help the world, I wanted to serve. And from that, I just had so much built in. Um, my father had passed away 3 years ago. And so the questions started to build up, but more kind of led me to chiropractic, was just having one conversation with a chiropractor. And he was able to just open my mind, and I knew from that moment that like that was it. Like I was hooked on, I was obsessed, I was wanting to learn so much about chiropractic and what it does. I wasn't i wasn't grown into chiropractic where I actually was getting adjustments all the time, but I just knew immediately that this was the right thing, that this was the next dimension for health for me, of course. But yeah.
You saying that you worked with the community, though. What questions were building up for you as you start working with the community? You start really getting some deeper insights into what the community challenges are and what people are dealing with, what people are facing, and also what kinds of behaviors they're exhibiting. So, can you talk about some of those questions that started to develop within you as you were working with the community that you were involved with? And what questions got answered when you connected with that chiropractor?
Yeah, of course. So I had a few hats when I worked with the community. I worked as a PE coordinator. I worked as a behavior interventionalist, and those two was like wonderful jobs that I was able to really accumulate some level of understanding for children. So a lot of things that I seen was um, classrooms, just knowing how kids learn, and just also, how every kid was different. They all brought something different. They all had a different gift, and it was very different in mine. Their reality was very different from mine, and so um, I always knew that there was more to figure out within the community.
Mhm.
To dive deep, I had one kid who I would say kind of changed my perspective because he was a second grader and he knew so much. Very athletic, but couldn't, get it together in a classroom. And I've had kids, one of my hardest experiences when I had a kid who had autism, kind of like, you know, started punching me out one time. Um, Funny to say that, but it wasn't that bad. But it just made me so curious to know what's triggering them in the mind. And so when you look at everything in a chiropractic sense, it just made so much sense, like how, the body's kind of a vessel, and learning from a chiropractic perspective, it was like, yes, this makes so much sense. Like we're
Mhm.
we're not really getting to the source. Like we're trying to do all these things that are external. but it's not really getting to the source. And I really wanted that for the kids as bad as as you can say, like I just was passionate about helping the kids, and I saw parents desperately wanting that help. And so feeling that, having that feeling from the community was really big for me.
Hmm. How long ago did you decide that you wanted to go and become a chiropractor?
Actually, this past year,
Okay.
this past year, I, like I said, I started dealing with my mental health a little bit because I started feeling anxiety. Um, and so that's when I started asking questions for myself, like, what is this? Like never experienced stuff like that. So I ended up like going down this whole path of trying to figure out the mind and the body connection. And, it led me to chiropractic. And so
Hmm.
ever since then, I was like, this is it. I know this is what works.
Hmm. And ever since that moment, what have you done to start to prepare yourself for chiropractic school?
Well, first I finished up some science classes. Um, I finished up science classes. I read books. I went to Chiro's training club, um, training culture up in the Bay. I went to go do a level one. Uh, I've done a lot of things for me to learn as much as I can now. So when I did go into school, I knew exactly what they were talking about.
Mm.
Kind of like that Mamba mentality. I just kind of turned on a switch and just went straight in. Didn't matter if I didn't know any material. It's just about putting myself in the position where I could learn as much as possible about chiropractic. And I started doing research. Um, some of the people, so the thing that I do love about chiropractic was the art, philosophy, and the science. And those three are like pretty much your foundational principles for chiropractic. So I just started finding chiropractors that I could look up to and be inspired by, and just sending them messages and asking them questions and kind of picking their brains. Um, so every week I'm constantly researching, um, and just doing the best I can, and that's what kind of led me here to this point. So I've had a few schools that I'm interested in, and you know, kind of set in stone with one already.
You are set in stone, or you're committed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which school is that?
Life West
Okay.
and up
Okay.
in the Bay. Yeah.
And what is it about that school that was the deciding factor, or was the one thing that what was the one thing that really made it clear to you that that's the one?
Um, I think is I think it was very important for me to be in an environment that I knew I wanted to learn there specifically. Like, I know my challenges with school. I've always been a good student, but whenever my interest level kind of decreases at a certain point, I start to like trickle down. So I felt like Life West was the best um, suit for values. A lot of the message that they come across is serving, and that's what I'm about. I've went to grow up in a Christian school, so the same environment, being in similar, almost like a vitalistic component to it, it made me feel a little bit more at home than any other school that I've kind of been around. Um, I think his name is Ron Oberstein, who's the president. Just hearing him speak, knowing that he had a basketball background, knowing that he came from almost the same environment that I came from, made me feel a little bit more, you know, this is he kind of knows what I'm experiencing as a basketball player. Then also his roommate I heard was Joe Dispenza, and Joe Dispenza was probably one of my favorite guys to listening to when I was going through my anxiety. And just knowing what he was to me, it was just like, all right, Life West is where it's at. And of course, Life University was one of my options, but I wanted somewhere where I could kind of stay somewhat around home, so that drive wasn't too bad. So
Okay.
it was easy. It was easy to choose Life West.
Did you really see chiropractic being represented in the high school you went to or the college you went to? And why do you think that chiropractic still remains underrepresented amongst students that are interested in kinesiology, exercise science, that are moving towards biology degrees and want to go into healthcare, but yet chiropractic is still not really available?
Man, that's my same question every day. I think no, in high school, no, you don't get a understanding of it at all. In LA, you don't. Well, not where I'm from. Like there's not much people with the approach of the real chiropractic. And when I say that, it's not just cracking your back. It's not like everybody here has, it's like the stigma of, oh, they're just cracking your back, but it's like God that's within the spine. Like you have to. I try to put in that component, like it's that vital. And we don't grow up with that. We don't grow up with that understanding. We have no clue. I don't know why. I think it's because in the communities where I live in specifically, it's never been chiropractors coming into like a career day and like recruiting some kids and saying, hey, this is what chiropractic is about. There's nobody in our schools, in our community, especially in LAUSD, that is teaching us anything about that. And I think there needs to be more chiropractors when they do come out of these schools that, they're actually putting themselves in a position to spread a message, and serve in that higher level. I
Mhm.
think the podcast itself, Pete Cairo, puts people in a perspective of what that is. And that's exactly what's needed in our communities. Even like I said, even when I was working with LAUSD, and even knowing a good amount of coming from a personal training standpoint, I didn't even know chiropractors were that valuable until I was like, this makes all the sense why this will work. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's just not being around it, not having an environment that's, all of our chiropractors practices are around here. They're kind of like in the cut. You never really see them. And of course, our healthcares don't provide like a true chiropractor, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and it doesn't serve the student to never hear about chiropractic. It
hmm
doesn't serve the universities that are teaching chiropractic, the colleges, to have incoming students be unfamiliar with chiropractic. It doesn't serve anybody, right?
yeah,
It would benefit the student greatly to gain an expanded context of what chiropractic has to offer, not only from the philosophy, the art, and the science, but also from the communication standpoint and meeting people where they're at, because as you just said, it's very much an unfamiliar concept, and people have misconceptions of it. And then
yes,
also it doesn't it doesn't take much for a college or a high school to implement some pre-chiropractic education or awareness,
absolutely.
and then the new graduates of those colleges or high schools are going to feel like, oh, my college or high school cared enough about me to
Yeah,
expose me to more than what was just in the curriculum. There
yeah,
was opportunities and resources that existed, alternative opportunities, things that people don't hear about that often, and they would give more thanks. They would be a happier alumni of that undergraduate institution or
yeah.
that high school. They would look back and be like, I'm so
hmm
glad the guidance counselor put me on, and now
Yeah,
look at what it's turned into, right?
yep, yep, absolutely. I'm actually gonna interject too. Just the other day, like when I was taking my science classes, I remember like I was telling my fiance, I was like, science classes to me was never like it was not something that was emphasized within school. I remember in middle school, all the science classes, like, learning about biology was kind of like on the back burner. Like you have like a math class and then right after you have science and it will kind of like rush you through. So not even having like knowing that chiropractic comes in, one of its principles is coming from a science standpoint, just not having that science like biology and like learning about the human body and everything is just kind of like, it kind of like puts us away from it. It never really like gets us to that point. It's not until I actually had a sports medicine teacher who, led me to all my studies as well, got me really interested in, but still just not having science classes or having people to come into our school and tell us what that's about, then it was really like far fetched.
Hmm. And the chiropractic sciences are completely different in many
I'm
ways than the
sure.
medical sciences, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, just studying neuroplasticity as a high school student and learning how the body changes with time, how the brain and the nervous system adapts to its environment and will change based on stimuli in its environment. That's something that you probably never heard a message like that in any of the science classes. In high
Yeah.
school, for sure, maybe not even in college.
Mm-mm.
So, and this is like basic fundamental, Gray's Anatomy, any anatomy textbook, you open it up, you see a spine and a brain and a nervous system, but it just is not really prioritized. And then the philosophy, like you just mentioned, growing up in a Christian school and you saying that God is in your spine, you
Yep.
recognize the parallel messaging of chiropractic philosophy. And
Mm-hmm.
um, can you just talk about like being a Christian and growing up, and then also now recently getting exposure to chiropractic, and you saying, "I want to
Um,
go become a chiropractor." Now you haven't gotten to school yet, but how does that make you feel inside that you grew up in the church, and this message really resonates with you, and you're wondering why no other people in the church were really uh, bringing you to this or making you aware of this?
that's a good question. I love that question. Um, so, growing up in the church, um, it was it was a wonderful experience. I grew up in a great LA church, in high school, where you got to experience, people up close, being with your teachers. Um, it was not like your ordinary teachers. Like these teachers really care for you, like your parents. So coming from that and like having prayer every single day, having scripture being involved, like you've always, I think all of us that came from Christian school was able to seek God in a sense, like we all were curious, we were all asking questions. So
And then
when
the
I got,
fellowship, right? The
yeah,
fellowship.
fellowship, the serving, I remember working on Sundays, working for the church for coffee and just how it made me feel. And, it was part of leading me here, like I've always had like certain questions of why certain things happen and, you know, um, everything from scripture that we've learned. We had Bible classes that allowed me to read like almost the whole New Testaments and Old Testament. So having already a background of Christianity and knowing then now like that this kind of integrates perfectly in one, because even David Palmer, who I started reading about, um, a lot of his emphasis was in Christianity and maybe all religions, and so that's was kind of where I was at with, what my beliefs are. It kind of just everything just started integrating and everything started to make sense, and how the universal intelligence and innate intelligence are kind of just one and the same. It made more sense in my Christianity walk. You know, I felt like when you're done in a certain time in in my religion or in my walk, I felt like I stopped progressing. And I'm not saying in the sense of like who I am in terms of serving with people, but I'm just talking about in terms of like the word is so progressive and it's involving. There has to be more. And so that's what kind of clicked for me. And then once it clicked, it was like it just took me to a whole different component in just my walk, my spiritual walk. Um, Even yoga, like yoga was something that was in some, was it was kind of like abandoned, like you shouldn't touch there, you shouldn't go there. The chakras, everything was something that you shouldn't touch those things, and it was something that was demonic. I've always had questions that I always felt like we were forbidden to ask questions. And so when I started asking questions to God, it kind of led me to a path of understanding that all people are telling the truth and that we should all listen to one another. And so chiropractic was like the perfect approach, because it didn't shun any religion. It was so many people that were coming from different backgrounds. Um, and so I even read a book called The Yoga of Jesus. And that's where I got the quote, like, God lives within the spine. Um, and so I was just like going crazy over it just because it was like, this is who I was supposed to be as a kid. Like, I just knew that I wanted to see God, and I had the questions. I wanted to know who God was and what it was like to like almost touch it and taste it.
Mhm.
And so, just learning from Joe, who came from a chiropractic background, and knowing that he learned neuroscience and having that background, and kind of led him to now what his questions. I saw myself like a Joe Dispenza, not putting myself on that level, but I was very inspired by him, um, trying to figure out like where he learned all this stuff, because it would,
Mhm.
if I would have knew this as a high school kid, I would have knew what I was gonna do from the get go. Of course, I'm
How would that,
appreciative.
huh? Go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, just how would having known this as a high school kid changed your trajectory in regards to where you're at today? Where are you at in regard? How long you been out of high school for?
Man, I'm 27, so you know, I grew up a kid as played basketball. So play basketball was my first love. It was my like, it's something that I would say like I wanted to play overseas and play basketball and do that. But I've always had an emphasis in the community. I've always grew up in the middle of LA, where a lot of things are shown around you, and your environment kind of has to let you grow up in a faster pace than other people. So I had friends that, I had to help get out of the situation when I was like fifth grade. So for me, it was just like I was very active, very young as a kid. Basketball was our outlet. It was something that we had to depend on to get us out. I remember my best friend when I was younger was like, man, we just got to make it to the NBA. We were not thinking anything about, academics because we didn't feel like we were going to be that doctor or that counselor. Like, we wanted to dream big. Um, and I guess if I would have known from high school, I would have had some sense of like, I think it also came at the perfect time. So I can't say that because I was so drilled into basketball. But I think transitioning from basketball, it took me about 6 years. So that was when it really like, I felt like it should have been came in like in college at least or high school where it kind of was like, oh, I remember chiropractor. I remember getting an adjustment, what they told me. But I've never, I think it would have changed my whole trajectory. I would have knew from like high school, like senior year, like, okay, if I'm going into school, I'm going to try to be like, I'm going to put emphasis in that. Like, I've learned exercise science was my major, but it didn't give me enough to know that I should take it seriously. And that's not putting like, I just knew it was like inevitable for me to learn these things, like because I was a basketball player. So it's easy. Most of us that are athletes just go into something that's kind of familiar. Um, but because chiropractic had those three philosophy, the art, and the science, it it kind of blew my mind. Like, that was my passion, you know, as just who I was as a person. So I felt like it would have clicked really in college, and I would have took it far. But now I'm 27. I had a almost like a first time, like first quarter of my career. So I was like, oh, okay, like I wish this would have, it's hard transitioning from a basketball player into now, learning what you could be obsessed about, like what am I gonna love next? So
Mhm.
that was the hardest part.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's real. That's real.
Hmm.
Being obsessed with something, enough to like have a deep love for it that you don't really see anything else besides that. I think
Yeah.
that sports brings that out of us, or creates that within us. And now that you've turned your attention and focus to chiropractic, and it sounds like you're very resourceful, that you like to explore your resources and do your research, what are you exploring? What questions do you have? Is there any way that I can support you before you get to school, just by helping continue to build context in your mind?
I think for me, you kind of touched on it earlier. Like I still have that mindset of school, where like your basic sciences, where like, like chemistry, like there's things that I'm still trying to pick up. So I guess like entering into my first year, I don't have a clue as of what I'm getting myself into, like what am I actually gonna be learning, I've heard from many students that I've, you know, asked, learning about the anatomy and everything. And so I think one of my biggest question is just like, what sciences should I emphasize now? Because I still have science classes that I need to take, maybe one. And
Hmm.
so I've always they always tell me just take a science class in the lab, but I really want to know the science classes that are going to actually help me be the best chiropractor I could be, you know, because some things my knowledge of sciences are, I wouldn't say like is great, but it's just like I want to just set myself up properly that I could smoothly transition because I've heard many stories about, you know, chiropractic school is not that easy, it's pretty challenging at times. So for me it's like, all right, I want to learn as much as I can now, so
Hmm.
what sciences make more sense for me to transition smoothly into my first year?
Going into school, I had been unknowingly exposed to some of the sciences, and it wasn't like straight told to me, like, hey, really pay attention to this,
Yeah.
because this moment right here is like introducing you to the chiropractic sciences.
Hmm.
Um, James Chestnut has a program. He's written a number of books. The first one is The Scientific and Philosophical Validation of Chiropractic Within the Wellness Paradigm. And he
Oh
goes
wow.
through a number of different concepts that are related to the spine and nervous system, and even touches a little bit on mental acuity and consciousness and awareness within the body. Things like proprioception, he calls positive body signals, and
Oh wow.
nociception, or negative body signals. And he really simplifies the sciences to better understand like what research has been done to validate the premises of chiropractic, because he creates the 14 foundational premises of chiropractic, and then he goes one by one through them, and they each build on each other. And it's based in deductive reasoning. So it's really a helpful text. I highly recommend, especially when you get to school. Go to the library, find it. It's a blue book. You might even be able to find it online here if you search his name in the internet. I know he
What's
sells
his
them on
name
the
again?
wellnesspractice.com. But there's the reality check by Heidi Havoc.
I had read that already. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the
There's
first book I read.
there's a number of places. The book that we're about to release has about 25 of the different scientific concepts to explore. It doesn't necessarily go deep into them; it just touches on them. But some of the concepts off the top of my head is oscillation, and studying how the body oscillates in space, proprioception, nociception, receptors that are on the spine, like mechanoreceptors, understanding
Hmm.
how they work, understanding the action potential and the basis of neurology, neuron theory, going into what's called allostasis, which is allostatic load. And it's basically a measurement of adaptive physiology. So we have normal homeostatic physiology,
Yeah.
and then we have adaptive physiology based on how our environment is stressing us out. And so
Wow.
allostatic load is, as the stress builds up, our physiology changes, and it's a recognition that the physiology changes with the environmental changes. So that's a great scientific concept. Obviously, like I mentioned, nociception, but also I meant not nociception, neuroplasticity, and studying some of the work of Joe Dispenza and neuroplasticity,
Yeah.
epigenetics, the work of
Yes.
Bruce Lipton. I
Yeah.
don't know
For
if you've seen his
Beyond the Blue.
books. He's got a number of
Yep.
them. Um, the concept of adaptation is obviously something that you can observe in nature, that you can observe in your community, that you can help your community with. To me, what chiropractic school really gave me is the science of adaptation, and observing the
Wow.
challenges, the deficiencies that are in our environment, like not having food access, or not
Wow.
having quality mental health support, or not having chiropractic be accessible as a resource for people who are dealing with adversity. And then, um, yeah, creating adaptive solutions, or solutions that are rooted in how do we help these people adapt, right? Like
Yeah.
how do we get somebody to truly understand that you don't have to be wealthy to be healthy, that you don't necessarily have to have a lot of money to eat well, to you don't have to eat all organic. You can eat some organic and some not organic. You can show up at the end of the farmers market and start to connect with the farmers who are getting rid of things and need to get rid of some stuff, and just explain your situation and offer them a very small amount of money for a huge box of fruits and veggies, and develop those relationships and efforts, right? So it's it's kind of open-ended in regards to how you can explore consciousness, the science of consciousness, um, the neuroskeletal framework, and how that shows up through things like anatomy trains. I think that's a great book
I read
to
that.
go deep into.
I got that
Thomas
one. Yeah.
Myers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The fascia. Yeah.
The fascia, and then maybe even studying the craniosacral system and the Upledger Institute, and just getting exposure to this system that is connected between the brain, where the cerebrospinal fluid is produced, and the
Yeah.
occipital mechanism of how the craniocervical junction acts as a pump and pumps the fluid down
Yeah.
your spinal cord to your sacral area, and how the sacrum also acts as a pump to pump it back up to the brain, and continuously we have this movement of cerebrospinal fluid up and down our spinal cord. You can even look up dissections of the spinal cord to look at CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid flow. You could get into the sciences of how biomechanics work, not only of the spine, but
Mm-hmm.
of the extremities of the cranium, looking at the cranial bones and how the mechanisms of external and internal rotation of, say, the sphenoid bone works, or looking at the atlas, and the number of different approaches in chiropractic that look at the atlas from different analytical standpoints, but also just look at the symbolism of the atlas, right? We talk about symbolism a lot in chiropractic in regards to, like, what does the atlas represent? It holds up our skull, our world. We talk about the sacrum being the sacred bone, that in indigenous cultures, they don't allow that tip of the sacrum to touch the ground, right? They sit in a deep squat. It's meant to
Mm-hmm.
be hanging and floating in the air so that it can move fluid and stay in a constant state of motion. So there's a lot of sort of arthrokinematic research you can explore within the chiropractic biophysics realm. There's free books that have been published online that you can look up. Deed Harrison and the work that they've done. We did an interview with him about 2 weeks ago, and he's published over 200 research articles on
Wow.
chiropractic, and they look at a structure determines function approach. So they're looking at how your angles in your spine. They've even measured what the normal angles in the spine are, and through an X-ray can show you how far off you are from the normal angle that they've quantified. And then through a number of different things, not just the chiropractic adjustment, but also things like traction, you can reshape the spine, and then corrective exercises. And let's just touch back on that real quick. So you were a personal trainer, you've got the communication and the relational aspect down. Can you talk about, like, how you like to work with people from, like, a supportive standpoint, how you like to support them, and how you believe that's going to help you going into chiropractic school?
Yeah. So already kind of developed a business for my practice, I guess you could say. That was kind of like my emphasis. Like, um, I wanted to know, so well, most importantly, like just knowing the human and how it functions. And like I said, I've had mentors who, who've always had like a brain-based approach to training, just knowing. And usually when I come in, it's just kind of getting familiar with my client. My mentor always says, I always ask like, what's your assessment? What is it that you do when you see a client and you see, I don't know, maybe a hip dysfunction, or, what do you do? And so one of the things he always emphasized with me is he always says, always know your client by the threat level. They come in the room, they have, you know, the stress cup, poor sleep, poor quality of food, stressed out. Always base your training off the stress cup, what they're coming and what they're bringing. Because if you add physical stress to the body, then now you're putting them more into harm. So he always wanted to open my mind to not only learning about the biomechanics wasn't the issue, it was more so of knowing what your client is coming with, knowing that if I'm trying to let somebody lose weight, um, maybe one day where they're coming with all this stress, is not the right thing to push them as hard as you want them. Most trainers have the emphasis that says like, hey, like come here, let me push you as hard as you can. It doesn't really work that way. I have to go based off what's the threat in the room. And so learning about my clients and learning about their daily lives had put me in a position where, I want to say that I want to incorporate in my practice later on, learning what they're coming with on a day-to-day basis, and so I kind of treat it like my own practice, like my own little sanctuary. And I decided to come up with the idea as soon as I wanted to be a chiropractor, actually. I built an outdoor gym in my home space, um, especially because of COVID. And I knew a lot of people were going to be uncomfortable putting themselves in a position where they're going to gyms and they're with other people. So I decided to, let's take the moment to really understand what is health. And I'm very pro immunity. So I've always knew that like, hey, like we have this innate intelligence that's within us that heals all things. Let me make it relative to you through my training. And so I kind of bring more of the philosophy of it, and I run with it, and I try to make people feel comfortable in the situation they are in. I created something called the Kettlebell Club. So I use that Kettlebell Club to kind of, I guess, kind of build my tribe of people, my community of people where who wants to come in. And so all that is it brings people who are working out with me and then bring their people, because it's kind of like word of mouth, like it's just a trickle effect. And just knowing how to produce energy in the room was very vital for me to learn, because I wanted to learn how to attract people. Because like I say, you go to school, your whole life, you don't really know how to bring people together and how to um and I guess I didn't want to be that chiropractor to actually be a good chiropractor, a good adjuster, and then end up like not knowing how to bring people together. Like I wanted to be able to like, you know, you got to get people into the room in order to like make adjustments and do all of that. So that's the most important principle that I took from chiropractic, is just learning how to bring energy, bring people together. And so, yeah, that's really my emphasis, especially with my outdoor gym. I take it. I probably be still running my business when I'm in school, you know,
I don't know. I
because
don't know about that. I think that in the beginning you'll be able to hang with it a little bit, but
yeah.
it's gonna slow because you just don't have the bandwidth. There's too much that you have to focus
So
on.
I
It's a
wouldn't
full
be
time.
training. I wouldn't be training. I would just have trainers who would use my space,
Got it.
So I wouldn't be training. It would be me just kind of just being
Awesome.
full on chiropractic learning, but still kind of, I guess, keeping the community still together.
Hmm.
And I also want to do that in school. I want to be someone who is, active on school campus and kind of just, you know, joining fraternities and just trying to get myself the best connections that I could possibly have.
Hmm. I seen you post Nipsey Hussle on your page. Can you talk about the inspiration being from LA and seeing what he represented and symbolized for the community and how that relates to you wanting to become a chiropractor?
Yeah. Nipsey was Nipsey is LA, like, people who are out of state who are not familiar with LA culture is something that you are immediately adaptive to. And I guess you could say growing up as a kid in LA, through his music, you could understand that he was a real LA kid, like, um, knowing what he's seen, his environments, and how he went to school down there, like high school. He probably went his freshman year, and he went to school to my home school, and knowing that he had to travel on buses and being on the metro, like everybody has that experience, and everybody is inspired by our city's culture and diversity and seeing the dynamics of who we are. I think when you go to the Bay, like they're so diverse. Like everybody goes on the bar and you have different classes of people. But in LA, it's it's one class of people, then there's another class of people that you don't go in these neighborhoods, and because they're of wealth or because they have a certain status, that we don't feel like we're welcomed in their neighborhoods. And you understand like the dynamics of police, and you understand like, oh, I can't go there, I have to be prepared to go somewhere else. It's just the way he speak about it in his music was so relatable. And I think we all were inspired by Nipsey because of what his vision was, and knowing how he attacked it and how he was strategizing what he was in Crenshaw and Slauson area, um, meant a lot. My fiance worked at Crete Academy, which is on the famous Nipsey Hussle mural court that everybody's filming from. And I actually had the opportunity to be at that school before everything happened. You know, I've been around a community where he's been actively, you could see, like, you could drive down the street and see Nipsey Hussle at the corner, and he never changed. He never had security around him. And that's kind of like who I wanted to be, come back to my neighborhood, Mid City, and kind of give back in a sense of just like the knowledge and the things that we need to hear. We're not exposed to it. And I think that one of my biggest visions is just, even with chiropractic, like, I wish my young kids knew what that was, because then they'll have um, a different approach to things. They will have they will be inspired by it, because our interest levels as kids is like, okay, you're teaching us who we are as people, so we don't have a lane but to play basketball, play football, and all these things. So I
Mm.
think Nipsey was kind of the only one of the only people to be from a culture of rap and actually, you know, give us some level of understanding within, like Dr. Sebi, learning what he was teaching us, and through his interviews and, kind of his music, kind of inspired us to like brainstorm, and it started a dialogue within us in LA. And yeah, like a lot of the things that he talked about inspired me, and especially when I played basketball in Nebraska, and I always tell people, like, I used to listen to him before every game. And the only reason why I listened to him before every game, because I heard LA in my ears. You want to be back home. You want to feel like I'm back home and I'm supported, and he brought that to the table every single time. So he's a huge inspiration. And I don't think a lot of people know how much he means to LA, because, he reminds me of one of the kids that I worked with. Every kid you work with is just like, you can hear in his story that it's the same conversation we're all having with ourselves. Um, so We're all
having
related
having
to.
that life experience and having that exposure to Nipsey and seeing what Nipsey stood for and wanting to sort of carry on that legacy of giving back and also making
Hmm.
things better for the next generation. What do you think is possible if we had more Black chiropractors in the communities that you worked with or around the schools that you were taking care of? Like, what would that mean to the community?
A lot. Um, it would mean a lot. I think growing up as a black male in LA, I think I think the first time I've ever heard about me as a black male is was in second grade, and I can remember when they taught about slaves. I remember teaching about slaves and who we were, and the minute I heard about that, like my insecurities were just building from that point on. Like, of course, I remember the room. I remember everything in that moment. Like, this is who we are, and this is where we're our destination. And I feel like that conversation needs to kind of like not be at that age. I think we need to learn like um, who we are as people, and also like learning about chiropractic at a like early age, just learning the science, the philosophy, like you said. Even if I went back to my Christian school, I know that there would be so many, because my school was mostly black males and black women that are in my school. I knew it would be so vital because it just ties into the philosophy of what we've already been learning. Um, so if that answers your question, I really think it will play a huge part, because we're kind of just like in school to just do it, just to be honest with you. But if I think when you look at chiropractic, it gives you a great balance of like, all right, this is who we are as people. It doesn't give us like that insecurity that I felt as a kid, like,
Mhm.
oh, this is who we are, this is who I'm gonna be. All right, let me just go play basketball then, because this is not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be a doctor. I'm not inspired to be a doctor. I'm not, and I still deal with that insecurity to this day. I think that's why I asked you the question. And even when I was thinking about questions to ask, I was like, I still can't own up to being a chiropractor, because I've always felt like, oh, this is not my lane. This is not where I'm supposed to be. And it's still that doubt that comes to me, but it's something that it's a challenge that I want to overcome. I want to be able to tell the kid that who comes from inner city or is a minority that this is possible, like this is very possible for you to do that. Like, I had all these doubts, I had all these feelings, and I think that it needs to be a conversation that's ongoing, because when I looked at the statistics, I think like there's 2% of chiropractors are African American or something like that, and I was like, what? Like, how do we not know, about this? And even I have clients who are, African American as well. And I'm always saying, like, you should go see a chiropractor, like this could really help your health. Oh, I'm scared of chiropractic. And I'm like, why? And it's just a fear that we've learned over time. Like, we've learned to stay in a box and not get out of that box, So it's just something that I really want to inspire most people and make relative to them, especially in the kids in the community, because it's important. I think that the conversation needs to be opened up to us, and we need somebody who's cool and come from where we come from to actually like help, and inspire. That's why
No
Nipsey
doubt.
was Nipsey
No
was
doubt.
incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been waiting to see this happen for a really long time. I grew up in New York, and I'm definitely part of hip hop culture.
Yeah,
I'm raised in hip hop culture. My friends, I was one of the only people to even go to college, let alone definitely the only person to become a chiropractor.
yeah.
And I went to college in the inner city in North Philadelphia, and we
Wow.
were blocks away from the projects. And so I've always been around it. I'm in Oakland, California, East Oakland right now,
Yeah.
and being around the hip hop culture, being around athletes, celebrity athletes, even as a chiropractor, as a doctor, I see the potential. I see how if they just started mentioning chiropractic, oh, by the way, I'm lit because I'm a chiropractor, or I'm the way that I am because I
Yeah.
got a good supportive system. I got my chiropractor. I got my
Yeah.
barber. And I see
Yeah.
chiropractors very similar to barbershop culture where it could be looked at as that place that you go and you kick it at and you see
Yeah.
people in the community and it feels good to be there. It's not a
It's absolutely.
it's not a barrier, but it's like it's a bridge. It's a bridge to something greater for people. It's like you go get aligned up when you're in high school. You go get a
Mm,
lineup, you go get a lined up, and you're going to be better off because of it. It's going to help you see
wow.
clearer. It's going to help you focus on what's important to you, prioritize things, and not really be worrying about what your friends are doing or worrying about what your parents say you can and can't do. It's going to like really open you up. And I just really wanted Nipsey like I did a project down in Honduras where I was at Dr. Sebi's house, and if he wouldn't have passed away
What?
and my project would have fully come to fruition, I have plans of having him really recognize that chiropractic is most in alignment with the principles and practices that he's promoting, and it's just a shame that like little things didn't happen, but like there's still tons of opportunity there to connect in with, say, a Kendrick Lamar, which I'm imagining is in your area, and you be that chiropractor that adjusts him and helps him see our people need this. Our people,
Yeah.
if they knew that this was available to them, so we do need more chiropractors that come from those types of backgrounds that you and I come from, and
Yeah.
that have a caring to go back and give back and create a supportive infrastructure. That's really at the heart of this project here.
Yeah.
My question is like, if we had a pre-Cairo infrastructure where they were at the high schools or colleges, what would that mean to those campus cultures, to those environments? Like to have health being promoted, to have people trusting in their body, to have people seeing the choices they make influencing their health and their life expression, and them being able to get further in life or clearer and more aligned with themselves because of this tool, because of this, conduit or vessel, as you say, um, of human body, and not chiropractic. It's not about chiropractic. It's about what chiropractic helps you see
Yes.
within yourself. So I'm right there with you. I think that we need more awareness. We need to raise a vibration on our college campuses, on our high school campuses, and
Yeah.
any final questions as a pre-Cairo student, and we're going to try and wrap this up.
No, I think we hit it set in stone, man. That was phenomenal. That was great. I feel like I'm gonna have to come off this and ask you all the things like you're mentioning a lot of people, and I was like, oh, I need to like write this down.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's I think what you brought. I'm just gonna make a comment on it. Just kind of like what you brought in your emphasis. It kind of made me feel like, all right, now I'm really like heading down the right path because I literally love how the science and philosophy just integrates, like, because that's how I see science, just see it that I just see it in a component of just like how it's vitalistic, it's more of just bringing the adaptiveness, the environment that we're around. Like, I love that type of stuff that we can understand. And I think that a lot of people in my community, especially now that I even talk about it now, even though I'm not like in chiropractic school, just knowing what it could bring to the community excites me because, like I said, I've been around 200 schools within LAUSD. I've been to a lot of neighborhoods and just knowing how these neighborhoods that are, I guess you could say, are targeted and have our low income communities, it would mean so much for Cairo for them to actually, go in house to these schools and kind of teach these kids what it is, because I think you would have a lot of athletes who would kind of just, if there was even a curriculum that could learn in the high school, an elective, man, it would be a game changer, a total game changer. Because I know so much people who have, the same emphasis that I do, a lot of people that, and I'm not nothing, and this is not a knock on physical therapy, but there's a lot of people going into physical therapy that has no clue what chiropractic is, and I'm like, you know, chiropractic is just as great,
Hmm.
So I think if it was integrated in high school as an elective, man, it would be powerful. Even having like a career day. Like I said, I always imagine a career day, just seeing somebody and just like, wow, if I had seen somebody just perform an adjustment and tell me what that was and how vital that was, it would have been from sentence down, I would have been trying to work my way from there.
Hmm.
But I'm still thankful. I'm still thankful of the fact that it did came at the time it did. So yeah, man, thank you. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, good luck. If you're going to Life West, I'm just up the block. I'm 15 minutes up the road. So the
Nice.
Shift Chiropractic is the name of my office. I'm in downtown. I practice with my partner, and yeah, she's also a chiropractor, and it's fun and it's challenging. It's a very very challenging path. I think that if you, not you, but if you, the prospective healthcare career student, you're trying to figure out your pathway. If you're really looking for something extremely challenging, that's rigorous, that has a unique set of opportunities available to you, where you can own your own business, where you can design your own lifestyle, but yet you could also provide healthcare and provide lifestyle care for people, where you build relationships with people over time. It's really an amazing opportunity in chiropractic to do all those things. And I just invite any prospective students out there, if they're interested, to reach out, connect with Jamie or myself. And it's just great to connect with you, brother, for real. And
Thank you.
let's
Appreciate
just
you.
keep it pushing. Let's see how this all unfolds.
Yeah, appreciate it. I want to ask you about that Dr. Sebi too. I was like, wow, that's pretty inspiring.